It seems that there's nothing of interest in abandoned, desolate, and dusty places, but surprisingly, it's in such places that you can come across a $2 million hypercar or a painting that will make you incredibly rich. This is Infinity, and in this episode, I'll show you the 10 most expensive things found in abandoned places. Let's go! In 2014, an urban explorer from Canada who runs his own website dedicated to interesting things found in abandoned places visited a house that had been empty for a long time. Previously, it had been occupied by a woman who failed to beat cancer. She passed the house on to her children, who in turn passed it on to their children, who abandoned the inherited property. In the house, the explorer came across a large number of all sorts of antiquities. In the kitchen, in a bag behind a mattress, he found money, $6,800 in cash. The old bills were rolled up in a tube and tied with a rubber band. They had the date and amount written on them in pencil. Most of the bills were from the 1960s or 1970s. Many people, if they were that guy, would have kept the money for themselves, especially since the former owners of the house had probably forgotten about it by now. But the explorer decided to do the right thing. He found the last owners and gave them the cash. A couple of years ago, a woman was cleaning the abandoned attic of a house owned by her husband's now-deceased father. In the attic, she found a box with a ring in it. It looked ordinary, and the woman might well have thrown it away. But luckily, she had time to notice the engraving on the inside. The name of the writer, Charlotte Bronte, and the date of her death were written there. Bronte was a famous English poetess of the 19th century who had a great influence on English literature, and that meant the ring had value. In addition, the woman found bits of braided hair in the ring, which turned out to be the poetess's. This only added to the value of the jewelry. Appraiser Jeffrey Mann verified the authenticity of the ring and stated that the jewelry could be worth more than $25,000. It's interesting that the ring itself, without engravings, would cost only $30 to $35. Who knows, maybe you have a ring lying around somewhere that once belonged to some writer. In 2004, after the death of artist Clinton Hill, who lived in one of the New York neighborhoods, some of his personal belongings, which relatives considered useless junk, was sold for $4,500 to a man named Nick DeMola. Nick didn't get into the details and just took all the stuff to a warehouse in Queens, after which he forgot about it for 5 years. 5 years later, Nick returned to the now abandoned warehouse to finally examine the contents. As it turns out, Hill's relatives had sold him ancient Mayan artifacts. Among the items, Nick found stone axes, carved figures, and other interesting artifacts that dated to 300 BC to 500 AD. The total value of the artifacts was $16,500. Nick decided that even though these things were cool, he wouldn't need them because he didn't like art, so he sold all the artifacts. The most interesting stuff is further in this episode. Stay tuned to find out how much money can hide in the most ordinary wall, see an expensive hypercar gathering dust in a parking lot, and learn about the Frenchman who found over 100 kilograms of pure gold in an abandoned house. Let's move on. Rare coins. The details of this story are a bit confusing. According to one version, a few years ago, an American named Jeff Beidelman, who owns an antique store, went to appraise furniture in an abandoned house that had been empty for decades at the time. According to another version, he arrived at the house to help a family do a general cleaning after the death of the previous owners, who hadn't lived in the house for about 20 years. Either way, that's not what matters, but what happened next? When Jeff was inspecting the house, he found a crack in one of the walls. This piqued Jeff's interest, so he tried to widen the crack to find out what was behind it. As he began to break the wall, the crack split open and coins spilled out of it. Literally hundreds of ancient coins spilled onto the floor. Later, Jeff learned that these coins dated from the 18th and 19th century and therefore were highly prized. But that wasn't all. In the next room, Jeff found another pile of ancient and valuable coins. In the end, this whole treasure hiding in the walls was estimated at $200,000. Jeff auctioned off the most valuable coins soon after his accidental discovery. Poster. If you have movie posters hanging on the wall of your room, don't throw them away. It's quite possible that in a few decades, one of these posters will enrich you. Following story proves it. In the 1970s, Steve Wilkin discovered a 1931 Frankenstein movie poster in an abandoned and boarded-up projection booth at a movie theater on Long Island in the USA. Steve worked there as a teenager. Frankenstein is truly an iconic movie and also one of the classic horror films, which means that the original poster for this film can be considered a real treasure. That's right, the nearly 2 meters tall poster had been waiting for its turn for decades after being found by Steve Wilkin and was finally auctioned off in 2015. The poster went under the hammer for the incredible price of $358,500. This made the find one of the most expensive movie posters ever sold at an auction. Rare cards. Detroit is full of abandoned buildings, which means there's a very high chance of finding something of value in some desolate place. This was confirmed by a story that happened in 2015 to a group of urban explorers. In the attic of an abandoned Detroit warehouse, they found a bunch of rare cards featuring baseball players, hockey players, and NASCAR drivers. These cards, highly sought after by collectors, were preserved in excellent condition. Many of them were only covered with dust, and overall they were not damaged. It was this fact that played into the hands of urban explorers. Rare cards were estimated at $1 million. Although this attic legally belonged to the man who used to own the warehouse, he never showed up or they couldn't find him. As a result, one of the urban explorers began selling the cards online and getting a lot of money for it. He divided the proceeds fairly among the other explorers who found the cards with him. It's amazing that sometimes we may not even realize what a valuable object may be in our possession. For example, in 1998, a woman named Maxine Smith was walking through a Scottish village and found a bust propping up the doors of one of the abandoned barns. You'd think it was a fake bust bought at the market for a few dozen bucks. No, when art historians examined the bust, they found that it depicted the landowner and politician Sir John Gordon, and that the author of the original sculpture was the famous French sculptor Edme Bouchardon, who made it in 1728. But the most interesting thing is the value of the find. The bust was estimated at 1.4 million pounds sterling, which a few years ago were equal to $1.8 million. As a result, the find went to a museum, where it became part of an exhibition of works by Edme Bouchardon. Sometimes you can find things in abandoned places that many people would sell their souls for. For example, the most expensive and coolest cars. A couple of years ago, an abandoned Bugatti Veyron was found in Moscow. Interestingly, the cherry car has an owner. However, the car's not been driven for a long time and just stands in one of the parking lots. It used to rest under a cover, but someone took it off and stole it. So now the expensive hypercar is just covered with a thick layer of dust. Many passersby even write different words and draw pictures on the car. They say that the Bugatti itself cannot be called completely abandoned. According to one version, the owner keeps the car for his descendants and just doesn't want to drive it. But we don't know why he didn't take care of the car that was kept in normal conditions. In fact, such a hypercar costs a lot. In 2021, it can cost from $1.5 to $2 million. Painting. Madame de Florian left her Paris apartment before World War II began. She moved to the south of France, where she lived until the age of 91 and passed away several years ago. Until her last day, Madame de Florian paid the rent for her Paris apartment faithfully, hoping that one day she'd be able to return to the capital. It didn't happen, and the apartment remained abandoned for about 70 years. After Madame de Florian's death, appraisers came to her Paris apartment to prepare the property for auction. They found a portrait depicting a beautiful woman in an evening gown. The painting was hanging in the living room. As it turned out, it was a painting by Giovanni Boldini. The portrait was put up for auction, where it went under the hammer for $2.1 million. This made the portrait the most expensive work by Boldini, as well as one of the most expensive finds ever discovered in abandoned places. Gold. A few years ago, a Frenchman from Normandy, who wished to remain anonymous, inherited a half-abandoned house. It's a common situation faced by many people. The only difference is that Frenchman was very lucky. He found gold in the house, a lot of gold. To be more precise, more than 100 kilograms of gold was hidden under the furniture. The total value of the unexpected treasure was $3.7 million. But why did the house have so much jewelry? As it turned out, a deceased relative who bequeathed the house had been legally buying up gold coins and ingots for years. Even the relevant certificates have been preserved. However, all the money did not come to the lucky beneficiary. He had to pay 45% inheritance tax, as well as pay tax debt for 3 years. But even so, he had a lot of money left. That's all, guys. What was the most unusual and expensive thing you ever found? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you later.